Howdy, gamers. This is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire. And this week on the Beyond Solitaire podcast, I have special guest Cole Wehrle, staff designer at Leader Games and one half of Whirligig Games. How you doing, Cole?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
So, for those of us who do not know who you are, how can that be? What are some games that you are famous for?
So I am probably most famous for Root, which is an asymmetric war game, strategy game, I guess I should say. The marketing people would want me to say strategy game, published by Leader Games. And then I've done a slew of history games from a few publishers that are now being published through my own little imprint, which is called Whirligig Games. I don't know, I'm on Twitter. I feel like I say things about designs. And that's maybe part of what I do here in this industry. I'm not really sure.
Is any of us really sure? I mean,
Yeah.
but what brings us together tonight is that Cole and I are both post-ac, so we both have an academic past, and we love history, and we especially love history and gaming. So, Cole, Pax Pamir Second Edition has been a tremendous success for you. What is next for Whirligig Games?
It has been a wild success. I mean, I think I just want to footnote it to say that I got not one but two messages many years ago on Board Game Geek that expressed doubts that a game about Afghanistan would ever sell more than 100 copies. And so I'm delighted that we are looking into our third printing of Pamir. Right now, so since Pamir was finished, let's see, Drew and I finished the design and development work for Pamir in the fall of 2018. I think. No, that's not right. The fall of 2018. It was the fall of 2018, the fall and winter of 2018. And since then, we have been working on the rehabilitation, the restoration, the redevelopment of John Company, which in some ways is a very similar project to Pamir. It's a rebuilding, um, but in other ways is a totally different project. With Pamir, the real order of the day was to cut the design down and to make it cleaner and faster and sleeker. And with John Company, which is a game about the British East India Company in the 18th century, um, the goal is to make it even more of itself, to make the design in some respects bigger. And so even though it has become easier to teach and more accessible, we're using a lot of that saved rules to put rules in other places and to make the game even more expansive. And it's taken a long time, but we are almost done.
So, returning to old designs and republishing them is, with substantial upgrades, is not something that I hear about happening very often. What has led you to revisit these projects? And do you think that your experiences with other games like Root, with working for Leader, are these experiences affecting what you're bringing back to your earlier designs?
I don't think I've ever been asked that question. And it's a very good question because it is weird that no one else does this. I think part of it has to do with skill set. So I first got interested in working on games by helping on rule books and by doing graphic design. And so I do all of my own graphic design and some of my own illustration and the editing where I can, although I usually bring in an external editor to help. But I like running the projects and running development. I like to do all the different parts. And so I think for a lot of designers, you turn a design over to a publisher and they kind of are the caretaker of the publisher. And if the rights ever return to you, you might want to try to find a different publisher, but you probably wouldn't be in a place where you could command the resources that you would need to like do a restoration. It's just too expensive. It's out of your scope or something. But for me, that isn't quite the case because I uh, when I started looking into doing Pamir a second time, I had things in the rule book. Well, and actually, where Premiere the second edition started is I was just sort of thinking about how the cards work and how the layout of the card works in Premiere, and I started noodling in Illustrator, and I built a different layout for the card. And I looked at this card and I thought, oh, this is just so much simpler than the old card layout. And so once I had that card layout, I was like, well, like I wonder what the rule book would look like. And so I opened up the rule book and was like, I'm going to kind of rewrite this rule book. And then it just kind of slowly started building. And the way I tend to think about it is my earlier history designs, especially, were so carefully attuned to the demands of the publisher. I knew how much wood I could have. I knew how heavy they could weigh. I knew what the size of the box needed to be. So those pressures inform the game. But I think sometimes that restriction worked to the game's detriment because sometimes you want the way a game looks and feels to be determined by the game itself rather than an artificial constraint. Although I do think constraints are really important and good. So with Pamir, I just asked myself the question like, what does this game actually like want to look like? What's the form it wants to take? And then that question informed all of the redevelopment, the product design, everything. And so I think sometimes folks will see that I'm working on a second edition and think like, oh, well, the first edition was broken or busted or something. And that's not the case. The first edition of the game is fine. But what I'm trying to do is kind of like start, well, in this case, like, John Company, which I'm working on now. I just ask myself, like, what is this? Like, what is the platonic ideal? What is this game supposed to look like? What would lend itself to making it playable and doing all the things I really want it to be able to do? And then I start the entire product design, publication, graphic design, project management from that vantage point. And that's possible because there are enough folks who sort of also want that thing to happen that we can gather the necessary funds on Kickstarter. I don't need to worry about like making it retail viable because as well as Pamir has done, it doesn't really work as a retail product. It really only works as a direct to customer specialized product, which is fine because that allows that audience the audience is large enough that I'm allowed to do that kind of work. It's a very long answer to your question, but
I'll take it. And there's going to be something special on John Company to me as the type of gamer I am. Solo mode. Tell us about it.
yeah, there will be a solo mode almost assuredly. We so solo modes are a funny thing, and I was telling someone recently that it's almost always worth doing a solo mode if you can, because there are just enough people who want to play solo mode games. And they kind of scoffed and they were like, "Oh, don't you think you're wasting your time or whatever?" I'm like, "No, no, no, no. That's a good thing. There are a lot of people who want people to design solo modes for games, and the fact that that then translates to a command of some of the development resources is great. It means that we're widening the circle of folks who can of the kind of folks who can play the game. Now, John Company was the very first game I ever designed with a solo mode, and I will be the first to admit that it was not very good. And part of the problem was that I had never played a solo game when I designed the solo mode for John Company, and
How dare you?
it was really like I felt like it was the blind man leading the pack. Like I was like trying to like guess what I think might be interesting. So John Company is this game about the British East India Company. It's a game about social respectability, and it's a game about how the domestic cajoling. You can think about it like Jane Austen world, how that world intersected with the British imperial footprint on the globe and why those things are so closely connected. And it has a lot of negotiation and a lot of table talk. And so the publisher I was working with said, "Hey, can you think about a solo game for John Company?" I said, "Well, what if you're playing the way John Company approaches the game is that there's this massive monopoly, the British East India Company, that is fragmented into all these little offices and sects. And players will try to manipulate these offices. And it's sort of like playing a business game where everyone is jointly controlling a very dysfunctional business. And it's dysfunctional because you keep trying to torque it to your own aim. And so, the kind of negotiations that happen in John Company is I might be in charge of like ship allocation, and you really want me to send some ships, like, I don't know, to Calcutta, but I'll only do that if you hire my nephew to this like posh colonial position, and you like have these very intricate negotiations that if you just swap a few words, they sound like they're coming out of a Regency period piece, which always warms my heart whenever I see people really getting into it. So, how do you do that as a solo game? Well, my first impulse was, what if you just made the company monolithic, a single unit, and you just saw how quickly they could interact with India? Like, how quickly could you running the company get to where the British were in 1857? And it was pretty dumb because it fundamentally misunderstood what was interesting about John Company, it also like created very weird arguments I didn't want to make about the role of the company in establishing its foothold on the subcontinent, and it was just a friction engine. And so I think what really hit me after I started playing more solo games is that some solo designs are so like, solo designs are fundamentally about putting friction in front of a player on the design space. But the good solo designs do it in such a way that it leans into the narrative logic of the game, and then is able to tell a convincing story and have a kind of fluidity so that you feel like you are playing another player, or if you're not playing another mind, you are composing a story with a little like light assist. So where does that take me for the second edition? For the second edition, the person who did the lead design on Pamir's Solo, Richard Wilkins, is going to come again. He's going to come join us again on John Company, and
Yes.
yeah, he's very good. And actually, I had never had a chance to meet him and talk to him, but just the other day, we've corresponded for years, but I just had never been on a call, and we happened to get on a call the other day. He was charming, and it was really fun to kind of game jam with him. And the way he framed it was, if there is a solo mode in John Company, you have to be able to negotiate with the bot, and no one's ever built a negotiation game that works with solo. So this is like a really interesting challenge for him as a seasoned solo designer. And it's a challenge for me because it forces me to think about what kinds of negotiations exist. I mean, it's a funny thing doing a solo game because it forces you to really deeply understand your game systems, even the things you are building on intuition. And so the way that we're imagining it happening is that there's going to be an actor who will be controlling parts of the company and who has kind of their own agenda about how they want the company to go. And
Hmm.
critically, they know how to negotiate in the sense that there is a kind of like marketplace of things that they're willing to offer you, and you can do favors for it in exchange for the ability that you might be able to do. They might do some favors for you later in the game. And Drew and I just started sketching out some of like the very basic parts of its brains, and it's pretty exciting. I think it's going to work really well, and it will work, in kind of like like the Premiere bot. It'll work in 1 and 2 player settings. John Company had before a very stupid little bot. It was hardly a bot at all, that worked for 2 players, but something that my wife and I played a lot, and we really actually liked the game at two. And we're hoping to make the 1 and 2 player really, really viable, even though for some groups, this will be like something like Dune, a game that they want like a full table or, 4, 5, or 6 for. We really want to try to lift up that lower player count too.
All right. I thought one thing you just said in that description was very interesting, which is that you're worried about a solo mode that makes an argument in your game that you do not like. To what extent are your historical designs arguments about how a certain period of time or historical situation worked?
Well, all games can't help but be arguments. Actually, everything's an argument, right? Goes the old saying. Every piece of art, every piece of media has to reflect the qualities of its creation, the world that birthed it. And so therefore it has all those arguments kind of baked into it. But more than that, I think that I try to design games that have that even though they're full of arguments that aren't even fully understand. I mean, in the way that like I'm sure that they say things I wouldn't like them to say too. But I really work hard to make sure that my games are teaching something and trying to make certain claims and seeking to prove those claims in a way that feels honest to the historic record. And this is always a funny thing, right? Because, you could, if you read an article, a history article or something, like a scholarly article, someone has an argument and they seek to prove it. And games can do the same thing, except you're offering a model, and so you have to be really careful because you're designing the world in which your argument exists. It can
Right.
sometimes make it seem like you're stacking the deck, and like of course, your game suggests precisely what you think it suggests. So you want to build a model that is capacious enough that it can leave room for disagreement, and it can kind of like give people an understanding of the whole picture. So I haven't really like fully worked through this in a rigorous way, but the way I tend to think about it is games offer sort of like as history games, they offer these big models. And within those models, there's room for arguments, but there's also room for counter arguments. And I want somebody walking out of my game to understand how different elements of the system were like held in tension. And
Mhm.
so that can mean sometimes having a very like particular, like sometimes it can mean, having a lot of moral certitude about something that was wrong or right. But on the other hand, sometimes you can leave the game feeling like a little vexed. One thing I try really hard not to do in my games is to preach to the players and to make, because I think that, a small tract is just a lot better. If I wanted to just tell someone how it was, I would write a short essay. But I want to give people a sense of place. And I think, and I'm saying that because I'm reading all these Robert Caro novels right now, and he's so interested in a sense of place, not novels, his nonfiction books. And he's so interested in a sense of place. And I think that that is something that games can be very good at, is giving people like a deep, deep sense of place. And then when they encounter an argument, or when they come to a realization, even if they're not coming up into like an argument that's presenting itself very clearly, they can understand the kind of pressures that were producing that, right? And so for one of the things that happens in John Company is as players start to break ahead, they really don't care about the East India Company more. They'd rather it went away, because the East India Company then presents to them like an engine of societal change. And like, I've got my victory points. I would rather this game end like as soon as possible. And so suddenly you start recreating the dynamic between like old and new money. And you start to see, to me, one of the interesting things about the company is how it both became a an absolute like edifice of, institutionality and of the, established power, and also a route for young families to go prove themselves. And and in that path, like the whole action of the company became very contradictory, and like that doesn't excuse anyone necessarily, but it gives you an idea of why sometimes these big imperial structures behave in such like contradictory and erratic ways. And it's because they were composed of many people at cross purposes, right? And so like you end up having like barrels of arguments. I mean, I think one of the things that's so lovely about games is that I feel like rarely do I have like a single thesis. Instead, there's
Mhm.
like many diffuse thoughts that are kind of going into the game, and it's like not an argument, maybe like a system of arguments.
Ooh, I like that. So to date, your arguments have all been, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that your arguments to date have been very much based in your official academic research. You explore the British Empire and its impact on various parts of the world. So we had Pax Pamir, which is about Afghanistan. There's an infamous traffic, which I'm going to ask you about in just a moment, which is about the opium trade, and there's John Company. But you are moving in a new direction in terms of what you cover.
So my academic work was about the British. And it was about, I was kind of like, I always feel like I was straddling between the history department and the English department. So like my degree is in English, but I was working on historical novels, or we're working on novels from the 19th century. Some of them were historical novels, but also like deep putting them within a historical context. And the
Right.
thing that I would say that I was really interested in, the thing that my dissertation's about, is the imperial imaginary, which is how people thought and felt while they were under the spell of empire, while they were within that structure. How did it change the kind of stuff that they produced? And so when I'm working on a history game, I I'm thinking about those little points of feeling, those little, like those individual actors and the kinds of pressures that they were under. One of the things that I always try to pay very close attention to, I love reading like a good primary source, especially letters or like a memoir someone wrote close to the period when they were done with the thing the memoir is about, um, and just sort of think about like what are the things they're really worried about, And then is there a way that that can be put within the framework of a game, right? And so in the context of an infamous traffic, uh, I was reading a lot about these traders, these clerks working for opium trading firms, and you would think that in their letters they talked mostly about opium, but they don't. They talk mostly about like London gossip. And so like how do you take that into account? And so I think like and that's kind of how infamous traffic works. Now I despite the fact that all my history games to this point have been about the British Empire in one way or another, um, they have all required a lot of new research. So, for instance, I've done a lot of work on travel lit in Central Asia, but that didn't really prepare me for Pax Pamir, which required like getting a handle on a very big body of lit and trying to kind of supplement stuff that I had already known. And John Company's much the same way. I wish I would have written about the East India Company, because I probably could crank out a few chapters about it right now. But most of the work that I've been doing was kind of like right on the outside of it. And so I feel like even though I've specialized a little bit in the 19th century British Empire and 18th century a little bit. I all of the games have required a lot of new research that is well outside of my academic work. So it's not as if I'm like taking a chapter of my dissertation and turning it into a game. Now,
Right,
how this
right.
connects to your original comment is, you mentioned that I'm thinking about going outside of it, which is true. I've got a few titles that I'm looking at right now. One of them is this game on American Reconstruction, which I'm tremendously interested in as a subject, and I think it is probably the most critical period of history in the United States and the most criminally undertaught. And it isn't like I'm not blaming teachers because how do you explain it really? It's complicated. It's very simple in some respects, but what you're essentially looking at was America's first attempt at nation building. It was an attempt at nation building within itself, and it failed. It failed bad. You know, more or less
Yeah.
12 years into the project, they had to pull out, the North had to pull out the troops. And there was this tremendous backslide in the rights of Black Americans. It's horrible. And it's so critical because so much of how race is talked about, how much poverty is talked about, how much difference is talked about, has these roots in the way politics in the United States started configuring itself in that period. And so I think it's a great subject for a game, and it's something I really want to do right, but it's taking a ton of work. I've been reading histories of Reconstruction for, I don't know, 3 years. I more or less always have one in some step of rotation. I'm getting ready to do my second read through Eric Foner's Reconstruction book, which is incredible, probably the best one. And in fact, over winter break, I read Henry Louis Gates' The Stony Road, which is amazing. Um, so but it just takes a lot of work. And one of the things about working at Whirligig that I really like is that Drew and I don't have to go quickly, and so I can just sort of take my time and kind of slowly accumulate primary, primary materials and secondary sources, and kind of assemble like a big library as am getting ready to dive into these things. And you also never know what angle these projects are going to take you in. So, for instance, the framework that I'm using to do this reconstruction game, the mechanical framework, is quite flexible. And one of the things that I thought about doing is seeing if I can apply it to a different subject, um, such as like a subject in civic politics. So, like, I have a case study. Um, in the middle part of the 20th century in St. Paul, they built this big highway, 94, right through the Rondo neighborhood. It displaced tons of people. The Rondo neighborhood was incredibly vibrant. It was filled with people of all backgrounds, and a little poor. And unfortunately, this is the thing that happens to neighbors like that, or in the Robert Caro cinematic universe, this is like East Tremont, right? Um, and the building of that highway, that's a political act, that's political power, and I think that a game is actually a very useful way of understanding political power. And so I kind of want to see if I can build a universal framework that you could plug modules in, so that you could do, a thing about the gentrification of the East Side of Austin,
Mm.
right? Or you can do, the cleaving of the Rondo neighborhood, or you could do something, about Robert Moses in New York, and it would be a low entry point, a low barrier of access to this project, so that anybody who had a compelling story or tension could work in that framework. And the last thing I'll say about it, I'm rambling a little bit, but I'll do it anyway. Um, One of the things I really like about this project is Drew and I have a philosophy about the intellectual property that we're generating, which is that when we finish a game, we put it in the Creative Commons under a non-commercial license. And we did that with Premiere. We will certainly do that with John. We'll do that with every game that we do. And we do this for a few reasons. One of them is much of the art that is used for the game is in the public domain. So it only feels right to keep the whole thing in the public domain. But I'm also I really want, it's like a very small way that I can help lower the barrier to entry to other designers who want to work in this space. And so when I see someone saying like, "Hey, I'm working on an adaptation of the Pax Pamir system that applies it to Serbia," I think, great, that's excellent. Get a BGG page up, go for it. Like, I'm not, I'm delighted that someone would want to do that. And so I'm hoping to kind of like uh, grow our resource base in that direction sometime in the future. But again, as with the reconstruction game, these are projects that take years.
Yeah, I can see why. So, what I'm noticing is that even though you have departed from the time period that you used to study, your interest in thorny political situations and negotiations about power have not changed and just transfer to different periods of time. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I am really interested in the different kinds of political power and how, like, both how best to understand it and to understand how it understands you, I think, is maybe the right way of thinking about it. And that inquiry, I keep wondering if I'm going to make a train game or something, but that inquiry keeps just getting deeper and deeper.
So, I have a question. If you're going to have some sort of basic framework into which to slot multiple political situations, what kind of assumptions go into a framework like that? And do you have concerns that by creating that framework, you're nudging the scenarios that would be part of that in certain directions, or making certain assumptions about the world that are unique to you as opposed to things that are true about the world?
100%. That is an overriding concern. The main way that I deal with this problem is to not design a game until I've done the research. It is
Right.
so easy for designers of historic games, and this is something that is not commented on enough. It is so easy to approach a subject with a model in mind and to make the subject fit the model. There's almost no getting around it. But what I've tried to do in my method is force myself to go slowly and to really make sure that the model I'm building is responsive to the particularities of the subject. And that can allow me to get outside of my own subjectivity. Now, this isn't perfect, right? This is always going to be a system built by an ex-ac, like, designer of conflict games, and will always have all the problems inherent in that. But if I do my work really well, I can address a lot of the limits of my own subjectivity. Now, of course, you can't address all of them, but I think you can get kind of close. But getting close requires you being really honest with the kinds of assumptions that you're making. So I don't,
Yeah.
uh, do at this point, I wish I could tell you more about the model I'm building, but I haven't built it yet because I'm not done doing the reading I need to do. Um, I will tell you one thing that is becoming um, really critical and is becoming kind of like a focal point that I need to figure out a way of solving, which is the idea of strategic inertia, of inertia itself. Because one of the things that I feel like I see in politics a lot, and I see it in the politics writ large on the national scale, but also the like the details of what happened to the Rondo neighborhood, is I think you see a lot of inertia. You see a lot of people making actions that foreclose other types of actions, and their path becomes narrower and narrower and narrower, to the point where when the protesters hit the streets, everyone is kind of locked in their position. And I
Mm,
don't know what to do about this because, on the other hand, there are pivots. There are times when things that seemed like they couldn't possibly change very, very quickly. And so these two, like, there's a bit of a paradox at work, and I haven't quite figured out how to solve this problem. Um, I think it might be the case that the people with power um, have positions where they're able to be more flexible, or at least you'd want to believe that, right? I mean, so for instance, like I think about, I'm rereading a lot of the Lyndon Johnson Caro books right now, which is why I keep mentioning Caro. He's on my mind. Um, and it's so interesting to me that he went from a Southern senator voting animately uh, against any kind of civil rights legislation to flipping 180 on the issue, and then being
mm,
and then passing the only successful attempts at it. Um, on the other hand, in our own time, we have a major well, we had a former majority leader, the minority leader now, Mitch McConnell, who, when he had every bit of power that could be imagined for someone in his position, didn't move, didn't change. And so the, there's something I can't quite figure, right? And I think, Carol would say that power doesn't corrupt, it reveals, which I think is interesting. But I don't know how true it is, because I think someone like Johnson might just be an exceptional figure, and we don't want to make a rule or a model based on that.
right.
Um, but I don't, these are the kinds of weird questions that I'm wrestling with as I'm trying to think about what the priorities of the mayor of St. Paul in like 1953 were.
You know what's interesting though is that what you've told me about your efforts to make your games more accessible for other people to riff off of in the future, you I would guess that what you're doing is leaving the door open for people to argue with you and to twist your system in ways that you cannot foresee. And I think that that's actually very interesting as well. I think a lot of people who put out historical arguments do not always welcome fights about it
Hmm.
because you get really attached to your
Yeah,
thoughts,
you want to think you solved it. You want to think you solved it. You're never.
But
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, but I mean, do you have the hope maybe that people using things like perhaps the Pax Pamir system or whatever this system will be will, without your knowing how it even happened, reveal cracks in your own perspective that you didn't know were there?
Well, in some respects, I hope they do. Right? I mean, this is a really wonderful thing when someone shows you that you were wrong, or that you had you had misinterpreted something. It's funny, when I drew a map of India that I was working from, just a rough prototype map, and one of the her last name escape. Oh, Pai, that's right. One of our artists, Amita Pai, who is an Indian artist who's helping me with some of the art. She looked at the map and said, you kind of have the Punjab in the wrong place. Now, obviously, it's a prototype map. Everything's going to be in the wrong place. Um, but this actually, like, started a conversation about how the map was dealing with space, and I was like pretty wrong in the argument I was trying to make, and she called me on it, and the game is a lot better for it. So I kind of, like, don't mind being superseded. I think it's good. And I don't know. I mean, I when I was a graduate student, I stumbled into a copy of Phil Eklund's Pax Porfiriana, and in the back of that rule book was this little Phil Eklund head, like a little illustrated Phil Eklund head, with a bit of italics next to it that said, if you think you have a good period that this system would represent well, you should make the game and send it to us. Maybe we'll publish it. And I think the thing that is hard to explain now, especially because Phil's a complex figure and I disagree with him on so many things. Can hardly mention his name without having to say how much I disagree with him on things. But which is fine. It's good. It's good even. And I'm happy when folks disagree with him. He's a person who should be disagreed with. Um, but at that point, I had never played a game that took history they had such a no holds bar grappling match with history that was so like full of vitality in its attempt to like capture something. And for me, I was maybe 24, a young grad student who didn't really think about game design, but suddenly this little message said like, "Hey, you look like you've got some arguments. Do you want to go make some arguments about history?" And that's an empowering thing, and I would like nothing more than many other young designers to have that same chance that I got to have too.
Speaking of that, you and I are part of a shared project, the Zenobia Award, which is specifically designed to bring more people to the wargaming table. What made you agree to be part of the project?
Well, one thing whenever I see a project like this or I'm asked, I always think about what is this project trying to do? Is it something good? And do I think I could help it? And I loved the Zenobia Award because when we talk about representation in this hobby, that's a hard thing to just like instantly fix because there's all this institutional knowledge. I mean, one thing I think about when it comes to design a lot is the demographics of who are playing games is changing much for the better. But a lot of the folks who work in design have just been in the hobby for 15 or 20 years. And let me tell you, 15 or 20 years, this hobby was even wider than it is now and even more filled with men than it is now. And so there's this weird delay where we just haven't sadly gotten to a point where you see as many women and people of color designing games as one would think based on the player base. And so you're always looking for ways to accelerate that change and to try to tear down any barriers that might be preventing it. And one of the things that I love about the design of the Zenobia Award is it is so trained on fixing that problem because it's a design contest and that is going to one offer cash to people who might not otherwise have the right have enough incentive to design a game. And two, and also a big cash prize is it's razzle dazzle. It's got like it's an attention getter. And
For sure.
we got. I mean, I don't think we can say the number yet, but we got a lot more applicants than we thought we were going to get. I think the cash prize was a big part of it. But on the other hand, it understood that the cash prize is not enough. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you say, "All right, everybody, get around. Only one of you is going to make it, and they're going to get the cash prize, and the rest of you, like, well, thanks for coming." And so it's been paired with this mentorship program, which is going to be amazing, and it allows people to go through the process of making a game with folks who've done it before, and puts them in contact with resources that they might not have had. And I think my hope, my dream for the Zenobia Award is that not only do we have an excellent winner or couple of winners or whatever, however the final thing shakes out, not only are those great games that all find publishers right away, I want to see a whole cohort. I want to see the kind of stuff where years later people are like, "Hey, I was also in like a mentorship pod for the Zenobia Award and it like connected a bunch of dots for me." And so, these sort of things exist for writing workshops all the time. I read last year N.K. Jemison's brilliant Broken Earth books.
Oh my god, those are so
They're
good.
incredible. Everybody should read them. Fantastic.
Read them now.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think there's an afterword in one of them that talks about how she was at this like science in literature camp or something, a workshop maybe. Camp's like a horrible way of saying it, a workshop. And how like that kind of event allowed her to crystallize her some ideas she was working through. And so I kind of want this to be like a workshop.
Yeah.
And so I think like in the best sense of it. So I don't know. I mean, I think we'll have a better idea of if this way of doing things is going to produce fruit in a few months. But I am so excited to be part of it and to be part of it with you.
Yeah, me too. I feel very hopeful about what it could bring. I mean, obviously, I'm very self interested in the sense that I just want to play more and better games all the time. And I think this is a way of making it happen faster. But,
Yeah, of course.
I'm also just really looking forward to. I do believe that wargaming itself is changing. So we talk about historical games a lot. And I think that that's actually I think where a lot of the market will go. I think that we are in a phase of game design where people are really consciously using, instead of just sort of unconsciously doing whatever
Mhm.
was, in them, right? People are with attention, with intention, making historical games, and that we are inviting more arguments
Mhm.
into the hobby in like the best of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so interesting because the historical games, I think, are uh, like this sounds horrible, but I think they should be dominant because if you look at any other media, walk around a bookstore. I mean, the historical novel is a dominant, strong form, and the like a historical epic in a film or something. I mean, this is history is something that we all get to share, and so it becomes an incredibly powerful reference point. Now, if I go pick up a dungeon crawler, it might resonate with me because when I was 12, I was like playing a D&D or something with friends. Um, but not everybody had that experience. But a lot more of us have the experience of maybe belonging to the same country or the same culture or having a relationship with one of those things. And then so in terms of the commonalities that history offers, it's the biggest commonality of all. It's our shared humanity, right?
Yeah, we've
As
all just lived
framed in
2020.
stories. Yeah, we've all lived through 2020, and this might seem like a joke, but like I'm ready for the 2020 game. We had a funny discussion among the board that I'm sure you remember, where we were talking about like what qualifies a history game, because
Yeah.
there was one of the applicants, and I won't use specifics because I can't. Um, there was one of the applicants who had been an eyewitness to an event of historic significance that had happened just a couple months before the submission deadline. And we were like, well, this event obviously is historic significance, but does it count as history yet? And I think where we've landed on a group is the broadest possible sense of history that can exist, which is, you know, of course you can make a game about the very recent history. And if you want to pull something right off the newspapers, that's just the first draft. Um,
Makes sense to me. I mean, history is, I mean, this podcast is already history, right?
yeah.
But but I think that we use games in a way to process
Hmm.
historical events and how they work. And I agree with you. I hope that historical games continue to gain in our hobby, because I love games of all stripes. I would consider myself an omni gamer. I'll play anything from
Hmm.
fluff to like something that lasts for 12 hours and hurts. But for me, the games that give me the biggest kick are the ones that I can really sink my teeth into on multiple levels,
Hmm.
and that's what historical games give me. They give me something beyond, like, oh, that's a really cool mechanism. Oh, I like the way all these things work together. To like, oh, and these things work together because it's making this statement about this place, and I can go read this book, and it just really enriches the whole
Yeah.
thing.
I used to love to use history games as a way to understand a period I didn't know much about. It was like part of the whole. I mean, I remember when I was first getting into Napoleonics, like getting a copy of McLaughlin's The Napoleonic Wars alongside like Chandler's Campaigns to Napoleon and a bunch of other books along of that ilk, and being like, this is the game is a component of me understanding the 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 period. I mean, they're tremendously powerful. And I think that they're powerful
Yes.
because, I mean, this is maybe a silly thing to say, but you have to study a game in order to operate it. Like a book, you can read thoughtlessly, but a game you can't play thoughtlessly because you wouldn't be playing the game. You have to internalize the rules at least as far. It requires you to internalize the rules to operate it. And I
Right.
think that demand that games give their players makes them a really special form.
I think that's true. So you and I have a shared academic past. My question is, will academia ever begin to accept things like games as historical arguments and use them as tools of study? Or are we too attached to the traditional publication pipeline to change?
In English departments, there is enough trouble getting people to take co-author credits seriously. It's hard to imagine we'd ever get to a point where people would take a game seriously. I delayed my dissertation defense to finish the first edition of John Company. And I did it because well, one thing had to be ready for Essen and the other one didn't, to put it bluntly. But I remember my advisor asking me, like, "Why are you doing this? Like, don't you want to just defend and get out of here?" And I said, "Well, right now I'm in this position where the game is almost making sense. It's almost all together, and I have to either finish it now or I will never finish it."
Mhm.
And it, in some ways, required more words and more work than maybe two or even three dissertation chapters. And I think, we just wrapped up Oath a few months ago in October. We wrapped up Oath at Leader Games. And I've been working on Oath for about 2 years, about a year and a half, really. And I had a small staff helping with the game, an editor who also was a developer, another developer, an artist, two graphic designers, a mountain of playtesters. And Oath was probably twice as much work as my dissertation. So, like, that's a book, right?
I believe
That's got to
that.
count for something. And so it's so funny when I think about, I have started thinking about games as books. Like, each one, a book takes about a year, depending on what kind of book you're writing, of course. But I think about, oftentimes I think about a game as about, usually about a year's labor. And I think where they don't have a place in academia is the one in academia, there is a high premium placed on specificity.
That's
And
true.
that's a good thing. And games can't do that very well. Um, Games offer something very different, which is they can offer a degree of immersion that you could not possibly find. Like, I love, Saeed's Culture and Imperialism. It doesn't grab me in the way a game of John Company does. um, and the games can kind of complement each other. So I have I kind of create a little bit of a division in my head where I think about games as kind of like works of art rather than works of scholarship, and so they can be
Mm.
informed by scholarship. And this is a silly definition, of course, right? I mean, many works of scholarship are works of art, but I think about them as like, uh, they're just not quite the same thing as a work of scholarship. They're like adjacent to it. Um, and that is both tremendously freeing, but also will stop them from, like, maybe ever being cited in the MLA. But that's okay. I don't need to be in the MLA.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. So, a softball question before I let you go. What are you playing right now that you're enjoying?
Ooh, what am I playing right now that I'm enjoying? So I, like you, Liz, I play everything. I love a huge, huge, huge variety of games. Sometimes when I'm at shows, I recruit people we meet into our little gaming circle, and we take them through whatever we happen to be playing. And that I remember roping Isaac Childress of Gloomhaven into playing some games with us, and we went from goofy party games to this game called First Contact, which is one of the best games about language ever made. It's so much better than Codenames. It's unbelievable. And then a few minutes later, we were playing like the nerdiest train games alive. So, what am I playing now? Well, right now at home, I am playing a lot of Renature with my wife, which is pretty good. It's not my favorite Kramer Kissling, but it's interesting to explore, and it's smartly built. Um, I have been playing a mountain of Babylonia lately, which I think is fabulous, and I recommend to anybody who likes a Knizia game. I think Babylonia is great. I've been playing Herman's The Waterloo Campaign, which is excellent too. I got my copy of Nate Hayden's Rocky Mountain Man, which is his interesting revamp of Source of the Nile. That is an old style magazine game that is just really expertly built, and I can't wait to dig into it. And
Hmm.
yeah, I could talk for an hour about how much I admire Nate Hayden's work. Um, and let's see and then I'll give you one more title which I'm very excited about, which I imagine I wanted to mention because I suspect you'll be excited about it too. um, Tom Russell is working on a game called Nicaea.
Oh, yes. She showed me some of the cards.
It's I am more
Oh.
excited about Nicaea than I have any right to be. Well, that's not true. I'm more excited about Nicaea than games from really any other studio. It's not more than I have any right to be. I have every right to be excited about Nicaea. And what I love about it, for folks that don't know it, is it's a game about early Christianity, but it has a really arch sense of humor about itself that puts the period in the sharpest focus it could possibly be put into. And I am pumped for it.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna have to find people to play games with me so that I can play that because it doesn't have a solo, and I must play Nicaea. It has to happen. So I'm excited about it too. So, where can people find you on the internet if they're looking for you to pepper you with questions?
Oh, well, the best place is probably Twitter. You can get me at Cole Wehrle, ColeWehrle. No spaces or any tomfoolery. And then the other place you can find me is I'm on BGG pretty frequently, but like Twitter has kind of become like my board game home. And so it's where I tend to do some game writing. And if you have any questions, you can just at me. My DMs are open too. But sometimes it's a bit to respond because, they're I'll look at it and be like, "Oh no, this person wrote me 2 months ago. I need to respond." So I apologize. I'm not actively ignoring you. Yeah. So Twitter's the best place to find me.
Excellent. And those of you who listen, you can find me anywhere on the internet as Beyond Solitaire. Thank you so much for coming on, Cole. This is great.
This is my pleasure. Thank you very much, Liz.
Happy gaming, everyone.